I believe that date certain is May 19th. Don't quote me on it. It's sometime towards the end of May, where you have to let someone know if they have a contract for next year.
Are you able to say if there's been, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Ms. Moore, then we'll come to you.
Okay.
Just so I can be clear on this, the board is going to vote on RIFs, is that correct?
So yeah, I want to make sure I get the language right so I don't confuse people. It's not the number and it's not the people. It's the categories that can be RIFed.
Oh, okay. So if a principal says we're not renewing your contract, the board doesn't need to approve that particular person, or does it?
So it's complicated. So I don't want to get into too many details. But the process for most teachers is the contract is honored and continuing unless they're brought to file review. If they're brought to file review, then the teacher has the opportunity to appeal that, and ultimately it's the board decision to accept or reject the appeal.
Okay, but it's only when it goes up to that level. Okay.
Correct.
All right, go ahead.
Are you able to chime in at all on the reports that additional staff has been let go yesterday from a few of the elementary schools, including teachers, the custodial staff, and principals?
No, so teachers, first of all, if there's anybody that's not returning next year, they're not returning next year, not meaning they're not being let go right now. So that's one thing to understand. So when you say let go or leave, it's not immediate. The second thing is that both all of these folks, or the principals and teachers, are what we call Chapter 21 employees, or teachers are Chapter 21 employees rather. And so there's a specific process for non-renewal if that indeed is the case. And so I'm not sure, no one has been let go if they're a teacher or principal. With regard to custodians or other positions, I've already said we are reducing positions in many, many departments. I don't have the exact number right now because we're still going through that process. But yeah, there'll be positions in many departments that are cut.
What does Chapter 21 mean, just for folks who might not understand?
Yeah, and so I'm sorry to get technical, but the Chapter 21 governs the employment of teachers. And so there's a very specific process in state statute that a district has to follow for all Chapter 21 employees.
Mr. Gage?
So, correct me if I'm wrong if I understand this. There are employees in schools that their salaries are being paid for with money that came from COVID-19 relief funds?
And let's, again, we want to be careful so that there's not misinformation. The answer to your question is there are employees in the district, not so many in the school. So we're not talking about teachers or principals, but we are talking about other positions that were paid for by ESSER dollars. For example, wraparound specialists were paid for with federal relief dollars, and that's a recurring expense.
An additional question on that. I know one parent who reached out to KPRC and expressed their concern. Teachers and the principal at the elementary school have told them that a total of 11 teachers and a principal are being let go from one school. Is that a common number, and how do you plan on replacing those educators with people of the same standard and experience level to provide that level of education for our children, our next generation?
So we are right now in the process of recruiting teachers, and I can tell you this: we've had a lot of interest in HISD. We had a lot of interest internally and also externally. I'll give you one example of numbers that I'm fairly confident in right now. Hi, everybody. Take, for example, the 130 NES schools, New Education System schools. There are 5,000 positions, 5,100 positions, teacher positions in those schools for next year. 5,130, or 100, in those 130 schools. So that's nearly half the teaching positions in the district. Of those positions, for example, we had over 5,500 teachers internally apply, including the ones that are in the schools. About 3,900, almost 4,000 were accepted. And then we turned down the others. And then last Saturday at the job fair, we had about 1,500 to 2,000 teachers apply for about 800 positions. Several hundred were offers were made. So we're down to I don't know the exact number, but it's a few hundred, maybe 500 positions in the NES schools out of 5,000 that still are vacant, and those will be filled by the end of May. So there's what I'm saying is there's a lot of interest. You asked, will we be able to fill those positions? Yeah, we'll be able to fill those positions.
And I appreciate the information. I'm sorry, I would follow up on that, because I don't think I got the answer that we were looking for there. These are, from what I understand, experienced, tenured educators and leaders in the school, a principal, right? These are experienced educators being let go. And it's no secret, you could search on any one of our websites that there is a teacher crisis, not just in Texas, but across the nation. Are you certain that you will be able to replace those positions with trained, talented, experienced educators for our children?
So yes is the answer. The real question is, will we be able to fill our positions with people with a continuous improvement mindset for next year? I already told you that in half the district already, we feel pretty confident. That's not a lot of vacancies that are left. The other half, I think, have a history of being able to fill their schools. So I think we'll be okay. Right now, I don't have a firm number because we're in the middle of non-renewals, but also teachers making their own decisions too. So I think we'll be able to fill those positions. We were last summer. I suspect we will this summer.
All right, go ahead.
Is there any truth that teachers can have their, or may have their teacher certification and licenses withheld?
Not sure I understand the question. Yeah, yeah.
We'll circle back to it once they clarify. We'll go to Megan next, and then we'll head over to you.
My understanding is that it's around this time is when the teacher screening process, the end of the year teaching screening process was supposed to conclude, and teachers were going to learn if they had passed the screening would be eligible to work in certain schools next year. I'm curious if these emails or messages sent to teachers about, Zoom calls related to their job are related to that screening, or if they're getting invited to these calls for performance reasons. Why are teachers, if it's not ESSER, why are teachers getting invited to discuss their job?
So one of the things that I've said from the very beginning is that as a profession, we need to look at data to assess a teacher's performance and other things, not just spreadsheets. We need to look at how well they've been responding to the feedback. Do they have a continuous improvement mindset? So even if they're progressing, are they in a position to move forward? Principals have been in the classrooms all year. We have all kinds of data, DIBELS, Circle, NWA, things like that, but also instructional feedback data. We've been doing spot observations since the beginning of the year. Principals have been assessing their teachers through these spot observations all year long. So the way I would frame it is we are using data maybe for the first time. Data was not really collected, instructional data was not collected in this district on teacher performance. And we are changing that and saying, yes, when at this time of year when principals assess whether or not a teacher should be returned, they're looking not just at the anecdotal information, but they're also looking at data of all sorts to assess. So that's what principals have been doing. They've been looking at data. They've been looking at Domain 4, which is a professional practice in the T-test rubric, and they've been making decisions around that. That's happening now, and so that's probably why you're getting those emails.
Yeah, so to make sure I have it in the, like, teachers will be getting these emails because they're being evaluated based on achievement data, evaluations in the
Instruction.
classroom, and then Domain 4. That's why they may have received those emails.
And like always, I mean, in the past, principals made decisions around non-renewals for other reasons. I think this will be much more accurate and less subjective because it's not only those other reasons, but it's also instructional data, achievement data, and Domain 4.
All right, we're gonna go to you.
I know that the district faces a major shortfall this year, and you have talked about making sure that when cuts are made, students are not impacted. In fact, the district statement just the other day said that the district will do everything, will keep cuts as far away from kids in classrooms as possible. Yet we're hearing these cuts are in the classroom with some of these teachers and principals. How do you tell parents that you're going to try to keep these cuts away from classrooms, yet they're occurring in classrooms?
So I want to make sure we're not conflating teachers' renewal or non-renewal with cuts. Keeping cuts away from the classroom was a very difficult thing to do, and we were able to do it. What does that mean? That means when a child goes to that school, they still have an effective teacher next year. They still have the curriculum. They still have not large class sizes, about the same class sizes they had this year. They still have piano and dance. They still have DIAD, which is the NES extracurricular program. They still have their electives. They still have high-quality instructional materials. That's what we mean by keeping cuts away from the classroom. We're not cutting teachers. The cuts to some positions in NES was to right-size NES, so the kids will still see the teacher apprentices and learning coaches. They won't have quite as many of them, but they'll still have the Chapter 21 teachers in the same amount. So that's what I mean by keeping cuts away from the classroom. That's not the same as we are downsizing central office staff primarily. So that's what's happening in the district.
Ms. Margaret?
Going back to the question that Megan raised, what happens, does anything happen if the principal gives, say, a 1 on a scale of 15, and another appraiser for that same teacher at the same time gives an 11? Does anyone ever, and this is a consistent pattern, does anyone ever go in and say, why are you two so far apart? Is there some subjective thing, or does the principal's rating of the 1 just take precedence?
Yeah, so I don't want to get into too much detail about evaluations, which is what you're talking about, which the end-of-year evaluations has not happened yet.
Right. These
And
are spot observations.
that's going to happen, and it takes a lot of explaining. So I don't want to give pieces of information that then will actually misinform. So the evaluation of teachers is going to happen, and so will the principals after the end of year. And we're doing it all year long. Of course, we are looking at data all year long, both achievement data and spot observation data that the principal does for their school or the appraiser does, and that those data inform the evaluations. But at this point in the year, principals are not they don't have an evaluation to use. So your question is a little bit more technical for the evaluation. In the meantime, they're using data to look at a teacher's performance. In the past, what did they look at? Only the egregious cases of misbehavior got non-renewed. Now we're looking at performance, and we're looking at data, and principals are making decisions around that.
Yes, but what I'm asking is, on these spot observations, which are done by more than one person, what happens if there's continues to be a wide gap between
So-
what one person sees and what
Yeah.
another person sees?
So the answer to that,
It's supposed to be objective, more objective,
yeah. So in anyone's just to help a little bit.
okay?
So without taking it and confusing it or conflating it, spot observation training happens all year long to principals too. Spot observations are done by the appraiser. Teacher gets the best spot observation in the school, and it's all school-based, not district level assessing teachers. It's principal assessing. We train the principals, they use the spot, then they train their teachers, and they provide information on a spot form, and also other feedback, because they're in the classroom all the time, and we call that on-the-job coaching. So the appraiser is the one who does the spot observation, and the teacher gets the best of them. If there's a lack of calibration, first of all, we train them often on calibration, but the principal's job is to make sure that the other appraisers, if there are any, calibrate also, so that there won't be a wide discrepancy in a building for how the teachers are appraised.
All right, Ms. Andrew?
Is there something magic about the 4-minute instructional strategic reflections? Could it be 5 minutes? Could it be 6 minutes? And where did that come from?
You take me back a year. No one's asked about the 4. I'm not sure what. I think you mean the 4-minute time for.
Before the timer and the reflections.
Yeah. So it was always a guideline, and that's why hardly anybody talks about it anymore, because it's not been an issue. What teachers, just to help teachers at the beginning of the year on how often they should do what we call a multiple response strategy. The guideline was, well, look, probably once every 4 minutes. But since then, and even during that time, we were training teachers on multiple response strategies and engagement. And there's an art to it. Sometimes it's not a rigorous 4 minutes. And if you've been in the classrooms lately, you would know that the teachers have gotten really used to the pace, and sometimes they do 2 response strategies right in a row. Sometimes they wait 3 minutes, sometimes they wait 4, sometimes it's 2 minutes. I mean, no one even thinks about the 4 minutes anymore that I can think of, and if they do, they need to move on or progress in their use of engagement strategies. It's never just 4 minutes but when you're starting and you want new teachers to understand, well, how often, you can't say, well, as often as you can or as the spirit moves you. You give them some guidelines, and so the guideline was, look, just to start you off, do one every 4 minutes, if nothing else.
All right, we got less than 10 minutes, so let's go to Megan, then Gage, then we're gonna come to you.
Yeah, we've been asking about teachers. We've also heard that several principals have received notice that they will not be principals starting in the next year. Can you talk about why they may have received those notices and what criteria qualified them for such a notice?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So just like teachers, we look at data, principals look at data for teachers, executive directors and division superintendents will look at data for principals. Again, keep in mind that the whole concept, and this is causing some angst, but we talked about it at the beginning of the year. Principals are on a pay-for-performance evaluation system. The core of that is data. Instructional data, achievement data, action plan data, leadership data. So a lot of information on a teacher, on a principal. The evaluations have not been done yet. Those are end-of-year evaluations. But this is the time right now where some decisions are made based on several things, and part of those several things is data. So principals too have a lot of data, and we're looking at data. The executive directors are looking at data on principals. You have a follow-up.
Yeah, one more question, kind of a follow-up to the previous question is, so you're saying that it's not necessarily a reduction in the number of teachers in a school, these non-renewal notices, they're getting let go because they didn't meet certain data.
Right, it's not the positions that are going
Then
away.
they're going to be replaced by these new hires that you're talking about.
Yeah, and forgive me if I seem surprised, but this is not new things. This happens in schools all over the place, right? I mean, some teachers get non-renewed. Doesn't mean the position is going away, and then the school principal hires people to replace them.
All right, well.
Oh, sorry.
I was gonna say.
Yeah, you go ahead,
And
Joe,
then we're
yeah.
gonna wrap up with you, Asher.
I got a two-parter here.
We have a
You
little
said
bit.
that there's several factors, including data, that are used to make these decisions. Is one of those factors their current pay and salary?
No, and the salary, the compensation manual, the salary schedule is never a consideration. Like that's not a consideration for a removal or non-removal.
In the budget, we know for this educational year, the budget for HISD is $2.066 billion. Put it in layman's terms for mom or dad that has not watched a bunch of meetings. They're busy with kids, like many of them are. Put it in layman's terms. How bad is this shortfall going into next year?
So we are not going to have a shortfall because of what we're doing. We had to fill a gap of $450 million. Because a lot of that was ESSER that had been propping up the budget, and ESSER goes away. One could argue those dollars should never have been put into recurring expenses, but they were, much of it. So we had to close the gap of $450 million, and we have. So that we avoided the fiscal cliff that the last administration predicted. We're not going to have a fiscal cliff this year because we're going to keep our fund balance around $800 million, not go to $550 million as predicted by the last administration. So we will not have that gap anymore.
I'm sorry, just one quick follow-up. And I don't want to put words in your mouth here, so please clarify for me.
Sure.
You said that $450 million, the COVID funds, that were
It's a gap, $450 million, much of it COVID funds.
in that money, you said, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so please correct me, that money was inappropriately put towards recurring expenses? Is that what you're alluding to?
Absolutely. Yes, you should not have put so much ESSER funding into recurring expenses. And that is a problem that many districts are facing, but it was a problem that was forewarned. Don't put ESSER dollars into recurring expenses, and if you do, ensure that when the ESSER dollars end, that everybody knows that those positions also end, and you have a plan for maintaining your budget and your services at an appropriate level if you do that. So yeah, totally inappropriate.
All right, let's go ahead here, and then we're gonna wrap up with Asher.
My last question was kind of off kilter from everyone else's. So we also got word that the end of the year's field trips have all been canceled. Are you able to chime in on that?
Yeah, yes, they have not been canceled, and kids can have field days, they can have field trips. In fact, we know that several have already done it. They're going to continue to do it. Even during the last week of May, which is NWA week, NWA isn't every day for a kid. It's half day. There's still trips going on there. If someone had a field trip on a Wednesday of that last week, before the first week of June, then they can do NWA a different time. They have to just go through the division soup to make arrangements, division superintendent. So no, we have not canceled field trips. No, we have not canceled field day. No, we have not canceled the zoo. I like the zoo. Please go to the zoo. I almost canceled Christmas, but I got advised not to. No, you know what? Just on that point, the day before Christmas, the Friday before that Christmas, guess who said we should have off that day? It wasn't in the original calendar. I did. So Friday before the Christmas, we had off because I didn't want to change the calendar a lot, but I changed that day.
All right, last question for Asher.
Sure, thanks. There's a couple things about the principals. So my understanding is there's a principal academy this year with 50 participants.
It's 70.
70. Will all of
Next year, 50.
Got it. Okay. So will all of those 70 folks who are in training right now become principals in HISD next year?
So no. However, there's a handful only that did not pass the Principals Academy, but most of them, overwhelming majority of them passed, and they will either be a principal or an AP in the district next year. So assistant principal.
Okay. And a number that I heard in terms of folks talking about principals who are told that they won't be coming back next year. This is more rumor than fact, so this is why I want to ask. The number I heard was 40. Can you speak to that? Is that high, low, accurate?
I love your questions, Asher. But again, I don't know the exact number, so I'm loath to give one because we're still in that process. So there's a date certain, again, that we will have all of these numbers. So I can't give you a number right now.
But you can confirm that teachers and principals have received or are receiving non-renewal notices this week?
Correct.
All right, well, we got a few more, 1 minute left. Go ahead, real quick.
Can you confirm that custodian and maintenance workers are also being notified of reduction in staff?
Yes, I don't know the exact number, but almost every single department had to cut some positions. So I would suspect custodial, yes, and what did you say? Maintenance also, yes.
Do you plan to replace them with contract workers?
No. Look, we have had to cut a whole bunch of positions, and we're going to have to still provide a level of service so that we can still get outcomes for kids and support our schools. We've kept the cuts as far away from the classrooms as possible, like I said, so that a child or a teacher actually who goes to the schools still has the same level of support and doesn't have to struggle to provide good instruction. Some of those supports and the keeping cuts away from the classroom meant that we raised teacher salaries. And as tough as this was to do, to balance, to fill that, fill that gap of $450 million, we still gave a $2,500 raise to teachers who are not in the NES orbit. So half the district got $2,500 per teacher raise. The NES schools, of course, are on a different pay plan, so they also got a pretty good increase in pay. Except for the original 28 schools didn't get much of an increase because their salaries are already high. So keeping the cuts away from the classroom meant that we had to cut a lot in central office. We're going to have to find more efficiencies and a more effective way of working, and we've been able to do a lot of that. But that work to continue to provide excellent service to the schools will continue to happen here as we train people, find efficiencies, and start the new school year off leaner but much more efficient.
All right, and that concludes the presser.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Thanks for having the press conference.
All right, folks. I got to do my due diligence. 1 minute hold.
I appreciate
They
it.
told me we got a strict 4:30 time. I'm like, I'm trying to make it.
I'm gonna share the form with you guys.
Oh, thank you so much.
Hey,
All right.
do you want to tell me your email?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, for second year student.
I have half of it. I have what I started when I came.
That's why I was telling you.
Yeah, happy to help.
Oh, yeah, I saw you, I thought you was texting. I said, I never seen this morning text.
Every time I talk to you, I'm sure I'm gonna do a dog call.
Oh, no, I understand. You should just go ahead and set up your board and find out.
Totally.
Asher, sorry, I couldn't answer, I was. in the
Yeah, no,
middle.
I figure you have to juggle. Yeah.
I was hoping Jose would have, you know, but I think Jose probably.
Someone from the front desk